The gates of Jerusalem groaned open. 3 travelers stepped into the city, their faces lined with the grit of a long trek across the desert. They did not linger. They moved directly into the center of the marketplace, stopping merchants mid-stride with a single sharp question. "Where is the child born to be King of the Jews? We followed his star to worship him." The marketplace grew still. Word traveled faster than the wind, climbing the stone walls and slipping into the palace. Within the throne room, King Herod stood. He gripped the wooden armrests until his knuckles turned bloodless. He paced, then barked for his priests. They arrived, unrolled a heavy scroll, and pointed to a single line, "In Bethlehem of Judea." Herod's eyes narrowed. He motioned for the guards to clear the room, leaving him alone with the travelers. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a dangerous, measured whisper. "Find the child. Return and report his location to me so that I may also go and worship him." The travelers bowed and turned toward the gate. Herod watched them go, his fingers drumming a frantic rhythm against his side, his mind already calculating the cost of a threat he had yet to see. The star hung motionless, casting a steady pulse of light over a single roof. The travelers stopped. They stepped inside, the space cramped and smelling of dry straw. The child rested on the floor. Mary sat nearby, watching. Without a word, the travelers knelt, their knees pressing into the hard-packed dirt. They pulled heavy wooden chests from their packs. The lids creaked open, revealing the dull glint of gold, the resinous scent of frankincense, and the bitter tang of myrrh. They placed the gifts on the ground, a pile of wealth, in a place of poverty. They lingered for a moment, then retreated into the cooling night air. Exhaustion pulled them into a deep sleep beneath the open sky. In the silence of the night, a warning took shape, in their minds a vision of a trap closing shut. They jolted awake as the first grey light touched the horizon. No words were exchanged. They packed their gear with frantic, quiet movements. They bypassed the road leading back to the city, turning their animals toward the open desert paths. They moved fast, putting distance between themselves and the palace, leaving the star behind as they vanished into the dust of the route home. The house was still, the air heavy with the scent of straw. Joseph lay in the shadows until a presence filled the room, a command echoing in his mind. "Get up! Take the child and his mother to Egypt. Herod intends to kill him." Joseph jolted upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. He did not question. He reached out, gripping Mary's shoulder to shake her awake, his touch firm and urgent. She rose instantly, her eyes widening as he pressed a finger to his lips. They gathered their few belongings with trembling, rapid motions, leaving everything else behind. They stepped out into the biting cold of the midnight air. The village slept, unaware of the shadow lengthening over its borders. Joseph took the child, his grip protective and tight, and they moved into the trees. Every snap of a twig sounded like a thunderclap. They kept their pace relentless, choosing paths that led away from the main roads. Behind them, the distance to the city shrank, but the threat grew. They pushed through the brush, lungs burning, feet finding purchase on the uneven ground. They ran toward the border, the darkness their only shield, against a king who had already decided their fate. Each mile gained was a breath of survival, but the weight of the coming wrath pressed hard against their backs. The morning sun revealed the empty road where the travelers should have been. In the palace, the silence was broken by a sudden, sharp impact. Herod slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the stone chamber. His guards stood motionless, watching as he paced the length of the room, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The deception was complete. He turned, his face tightening with malice, and signaled the captain of his guard. The orders were barked with absolute finality. Within the hour, the gates of the city swung open. A detachment of soldiers marched toward the village, their heavy boots striking the earth in a rhythmic, terrifying cadence. They reached the outskirts of Bethlehem as the sun climbed higher. The peace of the morning shattered. Doors were kicked open. The sounds of struggle and sudden sharp commands filled the air. Then the screams began. Mothers clutched their children, pressing themselves against walls. But the soldiers pressed forward without hesitation. The village erupted into a cacophony of agony. The air, once still, was thick with the dust of the struggle and the cries of those whose lives were torn apart in a single brutal sweep of the king's reach. Years passed in the dust of exile before the word finally travelled south. The king who had sought the life of the child was dead. The angel returned to Joseph in the silence of the night, guiding them back across the border toward their home. They travelled with a renewed purpose, the long road behind them ending as they crossed into familiar territory. Yet, news reached them at the crossing that the son of the tyrant now held the throne in Judea. Joseph did not hesitate. He adjusted their course, turning his back on the southern road to seek refuge in the quiet hills of the north. They settled in the town of Nazareth, tucked away from the reach of the palace. Life resumed a steady, rhythmic pace. The child moved through the village, his steps deliberate and sure. He worked beside his family, his hands learning the weight of tools and the texture of wood. He spoke little, but his gaze remained fixed and clear. As the seasons turned, he matured, growing in stature and wisdom. The threat had faded into history, replaced by the quiet, unfolding promise of a life nurtured in peace. The long journey, once marked by terror and flight, found its end in the stillness of a northern home where every day brought a new measure of growth.